So the wetland program works in a multifaceted way. So not only is it helping improve the quality of the water by adding plants to it and habitat for wildlife above the water as well as wildlife below, but it also improves the optics. So historically the river has been kind of mistreated, and many people still view it in that dirty light because it was that way for so long. But the river's health has actually improved by leaps and bounds in the past few decades, and by people seeing life growing on top of the water, it also helps to improve those perceptions that Chicagoans have of our river.
We started in about 2014. We were looking to try to see how we could install floating gardens and things and use some of the river water as kind of the fertilizer to grow plants, essentially. And then we spent a long time trying to figure out permits and just kind of a conceptual idea on what we wanted to do. And then in 2016 we did a Kickstarter. In 2017 we installed the first 160-foot long section of floating garden in the Chicago River. And then after that we added more and more gardens and more pieces, and that's kind of where our relationship with the shed started. Basically we get these floating gardens and we build them all on site. So we get all the main components of them, we bolt them together. We add in leco, which is an expanded clay aggregate, so like rocks, and then fill it up and then actually put the plants inside of these.
So the plants grow into that leco, but then their roots grow all the way through the bottom of those floating wetlands into the water. So if you were to lift one of those floating wetlands up, you would actually see a whole root jungle that can be about 4 to 6 feet long root systems that wildlife can live in underneath the water.
Part of the idea behind this whole concept is to build that type of habitat and ecosystem inside, using kind of the existing conditions. And because of that, you see a lot more use of it from wildlife. So we get a lot of great blue herons and other things like that coming around. We've seen beavers on the actual gardens and muskrats, all sorts of things.
During our Kayak for Conservation program, which is a program Shed has where we bring people kayaking to see these spaces, we actually keep track and tally all the wildlife that we see. And we've anecdotally seen more wildlife appear as we're there, whether it be increase in pollinators and pollinator diversity, or birds and turtle diversity as well on top of the river. But we also keep fish traps below the water as well, and we're keeping track of what is kind of hanging out below those wetlands as well. But the goal when Urban Rivers and Shedd Aquarium started putting in wetlands in the Chicago River was to not always just stick to the North Branch. We want to see these wetlands across the whole Chicago River system, and for communities across all of Chicago to enjoy. The communities that have seen that industrial more over time, we want to make sure that those areas of the river get just as much attention as the areas on the North Branch as well.
All along we looked at kind of this approach as a way to engage the industrialized river and kind of transform it into something that had benefits for the people who live in the city today. So looking at Bubbly Creek specifically, I mean, it's historically one of the most polluted areas in the Chicago River. So we did some programs beforehand to really showcase the project and what we were trying to do. We worked with a lot of different community orgs in the area to actually install it.
Also, throughout the days of installation, there's many folks from the surrounding communities that use Park 571 as their fishing or walking site, and we saw members really excited asking questions what was going on, and we even had a few volunteers jump in and grab a bucket. They were just walking through and they're like, I'll help for 20 minutes, helping shovel the clay material onto the floating wetlands with us.
You start to get to know the residents. So you see the same people coming and they do their walks, they hang out there, and talking to them a lot, it was really interesting to hear their kind of excitement for this, and their kind of anticipation to see how it really turns out. And we break things down into kind of discrete projects. So one will bolt on connector pieces, another might lay tarp down, and another might add rocks in, another might be planting, and really kind of set that whole thing up to be kind of a more or less like an assembly line type situation. And then in the end of it, we get to push the actual gardens into the water and then anchor them along the river's edge in Bubbly Creek. It's really interesting because there's not very many parks or public spaces where it's really built by the community. This is one of the few times where we're able to enable this project to be done by everybody who lives there, and actually then the fruits of their labor will stay for years to come. You have people who are in the area actually, getting their hands dirty and physically, putting each plant in, bolting each bolt together. And I think that turns out to really inspire people with that and make them feel like this is a part of their community and their efforts.
Most of the time at the beginning of our tour, we ask them, we're like, what do you think of the Chicago River? What's the first word that pops into your mind? And number one thing we always hear is dirty, because that's what people have heard and seen. And typically by the end of their tour and seeing the wetlands and seeing the wildlife firsthand, those perceptions change. They're like, the river has life and there's a lot of diverse species that depend on it and live on it. We see baby beavers on the river, which most people don't expect. So I'm really excited with the South Branch initiative for us to continue to connect with even more people and bring as many people onto the river as possible.